All right, well, a very good afternoon and welcome to DROP's study launch titled Assessment of NAP, National Action Plan 1325, in 6 provinces of Afghanistan, looking at progress, challenges, and recommendations from 2015 till 2018. I extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and all those who are joining us from Afghanistan and beyond as participants in today's event. We hope today's event will provide you with rich content on the progress of NAP 1325 across Afghanistan and the challenges and opportunities ahead of us as we begin to implement the second phase of NAP. We also look forward to taking your questions at the end of the event. DROP's assessment of NAP was conducted in 2018 to 2019. The purpose behind the study was the completion of the first phase of NAP in the country and the need that arose to conduct a thorough review of the achievements while identifying the challenges in the implementation of the first phase of NAP 1325. The objective of the study was twofold. First, to explore the progress and the implementation of the first phase of NAP, with a focus on the first specific actions under each of the strategic objectives set under the 4 pillars in NAP's actions matrix. Second, to provide field insights and analysis that could help us draw out key themes, whether they be on its progress or its challenges, in NAP's implementation in 6 provinces, namely Tahar, Herat, Kandahar, Nangarhar, and Laghman. Though the study is limited to an analysis of actions stipulated under just one strategic objective of each pillar, the study does provide one of the most detailed and comprehensive analyses, combining the views of 9 key implementing agencies in the center, and at the provincial level, DOWA, the Directorate of the Ministry of Women's Affairs, the High Peace Council, and civil society organizations. I would like to now take a moment to introduce our distinguished panel. Ms. Geeta's experience spans 15 years in the areas of gender, equality, and women, peace, and security across peace and conflict settings, including in Afghanistan, Iraq, Jordan, Kenya, Sudan, and Nepal. Since 2017, Geeta worked as the Gender Affairs Officer with the Department of Peace Operations at the headquarters, where she led and contributed to strategic policy and technical oversight to advance political outcomes of the Women, Peace, and Security mandates. Prior to this, Geeta worked as the Gender, Peace, and Security Advisor with the UK-based peacebuilding NGO Safer World. Our third speaker is Mr. Ahmad Shahir Anil, who is the Executive Director at Afghanistan Public Policy and Research Organization, APRO, a research think tank that has conducted extensive studies on the implementation of NAP 1325. Mr. Anil is also the co-founder and Director of Operations at GRAD, as well as the co-founder and Association Administrator at APRO Europe. Ms. Nafisa Kohistani is our fourth speaker, and she's the Monitoring and Evaluation Director at the Ministry of Women's Affairs, where she has worked for over 16 years. She directs monitoring and evaluation of all national policies, strategies, and conventions pertaining to women. The moderator for today's event is Mr. Bismillah Alizadeh, who is the Deputy Director of DROPS. I'd like to thank you all for being here with us today, and a special thanks to UN Women Afghanistan for co-organizing today's event with DROPS and helping us extend the reach of today's discussion with a wider audience. Without further ado, I hand over the floor to Mr. Alizadeh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Safi, for the introduction. I would like to welcome our honorable guests and our respected audience for joining in today's launch event of this study. It's indeed an honor for us to have you all on this panel today. First of all, as the co-author of the study, I will present the summary of the findings of this study and its policy recommendations. Then I will switch to my main role in today's panel as a moderator. I would like to share my screen. At the beginning, I would like to share with you the background and context for NAP 1325. On June 13, 2015, the Afghan government adopted Afghanistan's National Action Plan on United Nations Security Council 1325 Resolution Women, Peace, Safety. The action plan had a time span of 8 years, which would be implemented in 2 phases. 2015 to 2018 was its first phase, and 2019 to 2020 was its second phase. The goal of the National Action Plan 1325 was inclusion and participation of women in decision-making bodies at all levels of government and in all aspects of conflict prevention, conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and peace building. The action plan had 4 pillars: participation, prevention, protection, and relief and recovery. The methodology for our study consists of 2 parts. At the beginning, we had a thorough desk review on the status of implementation of NAP 1325 since 2015 to evaluate its progress and identify existing hurdles that are preventing its implementation. To complement that, we also gathered primary data through key informant interviews in 9 implementing agencies in Kabul that included Ministry of Women Affairs, Ministry of Public Health, Ministry of Labor, Social Affairs, Martyrs and Disabled, the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Council, and the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. Then, in order to complement our findings through these key interviews, we also did key informant interviews in 6 provinces with Director of Women Affairs and PPCs in Takhar, in Herat, in Kandahar, in Nangarhar, and in Laghman provinces. In addition to the key IIs, we also did focus group discussions with participation of civil society organizations and PPCs in these 6 provinces. Now, the findings are put into a report which is structured in the following way. The first section of the report explores the progress and implementation of the first phase of NAP 1325 with a focus on the first specific actions under each of the strategic objectives set under 4 pillars in the NAP action matrix, with the exception of a civil service strategic objective under the participation pillar, where we studied 2 of the specific actions that were specified in the matrix. The first section also identifies the challenges that have hindered the implementation process of the first phase of NAP 1325 at the national level. Then the study has a second section which provides field insights and analysis around 5 key areas. First, provincial level consultations and coordinations during the implementation of NAP actions matrix. Second, status of women's participation in decision-making at the provincial level, access to justice and prevention of violence, quality of services to internally displaced persons, female members of internally displaced persons, and challenges in the implementation of NAP actions matrix at the provincial level. To provide a very brief picture of the findings of this study, I would begin with findings from Kabul. Under the participation, finds that achievements and women's participation in the civil service sector have been relatively good, but not all of the commitments have been delivered. In the civil service sector, a total of 22 laws and policies have been reviewed by the Ministry of Justice and MOA to address legal restrictions of women's participation in this sector. Moreover, 10% increase in women's participation in this sector that was committed to under NAP 1325 has been revised to a 2% increase per year, which makes a total of 8% during the 4 years of the first phase of NAP 1325. This particularly means that there is a 2% decrease from the commitment that was made at that time. In the security sector, the study finds that women's presence in the security sector remains low, and their participation in the decision-making level remains particularly low. The capacity building strategy for women that was committed to under NAP 1325 was not implemented, but the finding of this study shows that the Ministry of Interior has incorporated strengthening women's participation into its 4-year strategy, which spans from 2018 to 2021. In the area of peace and reconciliation, the study finds that women's participation in the peace and reconciliation process has improved. The findings of this study show that the HPC has developed a strategy to strengthen women's participation in the peace, reconciliation, and reintegration processes, but integration is not included in that strategy. Moreover, the establishment of a national roster of potential women negotiators committed under NAP 1325 was still in progress during 2018 and 2019. The study also finds that women's presence and participation in national as well as provincial elections remains generally low. 4 laws and policies related to women's participation have been reviewed to ensure women's active participation as candidates in national and provincial elections. These laws include the election law, recruitment policy, procedures of registration of voters, and procedures on the list of candidates. Now, under the second pillar, which is the protection pillar, achievements of NAP 1325 with regards to ensuring women's protection from violence has been limited. The committed mechanism for the implementation of eradication of violence against women law was not created. Legal clinics are established in all of the 34 provinces, but not under NAP 1325. These clinics are limited to provincial centers and thus do not satisfy the NAP 1325 objective that required establishment of such clinics in the scope of community centers. Dispute resolution and emergency response committees are not yet established. The basic package of health services was developed before NAP 1325, but under the action plan, a psychological counselor was added to the package. Under the third pillar, which is the prevention pillar, the mechanism for oversight of violence against women cases in family courts is not yet implemented, and the AVO commissions that were established before NAP 1325 used to oversight instead. 5 regulations have been adopted by the Supreme Court to prevent discrimination, ensure accountability and transparency. And finally, in addition to a national database was created for registration of violence against women cases to avoid registration of cases with multiple agencies. And with regards to relief and recovery pillar, the recruitment campaign targeting recent female university graduates is conducted, but to a limited extent. The mapping of all government programs through a gender perspective has not yet been implemented. And the IDP policy provision on the UNSCR 1325 are not implemented either. Now, these are a summary of our findings. We've also found that there are challenges that impeded implementation of NAP 1325 at the national level. Those were around 4 key themes. There were budget gaps, there were weak coordination between implementing bodies, particularly some of the implementing agencies refused that they had to do anything with some of the commitments on which their names were written. Lack of capacity in implementing bodies. Some of the implementing agencies that we interviewed say that they do not have the human capacity or enough number of staff to implement the NAP 1325. And also the implementation of NAP 1325 was restricted in many cases due to insecurity. The study also found that there were gaps in the design and implementation of NAP 1325. And by gaps in this study, we mean the designers of the NAP 1325 failed to consider some issues, particular issues, and as a result of those lack of considerations, these issues made implementation of the action plan difficult, if not impossible. And these gaps were flawed budget design. For example, initially over 80 million USD was proposed for the implementation of NAP 1325, but in a year or more later, I mean during 2017 or 18, then it was revised and it came down to 47.3 million US dollars. There were also contradicting expectations regarding donors' commitment for NAP 1325. Some of the interviewees told us that because the donors had committed to provide funding for Afghanistan through during the Brussels conference, so they were not willing to commit more for NAP 1325. And limited reflection of grounded realities and limited public consultation in the designing. So these were the gaps. And now to complement this, we would go to the provincial level and the findings from 6 provinces. With regards to provincial level consultation and coordination in the implementation of NAP 1325, we found that some degree of provincial level consultation have been existing. For example, MOA and DOA in review of laws, IARCSC, MOA and DOA in sharing job opportunities, and HPC and PPCs in developing a policy for women's participation in peace and reconciliation, and in setting criteria for selecting women negotiators. So there have been some degree of consultation and coordination between these bodies. With regards to status of women's participation in decision-making at provincial levels, we found that the status of women in civil and security sectors remained low. The 2% target increase per year towards women's participation in the civil sector has not been met at the provincial level. This view was unanimously shared by all DOA officials interviewed for from all 5 provinces. Findings gathered at the provincial level show that the implementation of NAP 1325 has led to a slight increase in women's participation in the civil sector, particularly in areas like the education and health. Women's meaningful participation in the decision-making level remains low at the provincial level. Interviews at the PPCs were happy with the increase in women's participation at the provincial level, but according to HPC, at the time of this study, there were 3 women members in all 33 provinces of the country and 4 members in Herat province. So one province, which was Herat province, actually exceeded that threshold. The finding of this study also reveals that women in PPC have been involved in activities related to peace and reconciliation. Their activities and engagement were mentioned by the interviews in all 5 provinces. Under access to justice and prevention of violence against women theme, we found that in Herat, Nangarhar, and Laghman, for example, women's access to justice has improved, but mostly this access is limited to provincial centers, and beyond provincial centers, it's very much limited. In Takharan and Kandahar, for example, women's access to justice is even more limited, even within provincial centers, let alone the areas beyond that. The findings of this study also shows that EVA commissions are active in all of the 5 provinces. It should be clarified, however, that the commission was established in 2011 and 2012, and as such, they are not part of the NAP 1325. The interviewees in Nangarhar, Kandahar, and Herat provinces agreed that there is a discrimination against women in violence against women cases by members of the judiciary, and also the majority of focus group discussion participants in all of the 5 provinces said that the culture of impunity with regards to sexual and domestic violence against women still remains very high. All interviews from DOA in 5 provinces said that the nationwide campaign has been conducted at the provincial level. The duration of the campaign, however, varied between 10 days, for example, in Takhar, to 16 days, for instance, in Nangarhar province. With regards to quality of services to internally displaced women, majority of the interviews said that psychological counseling has been effective, but it needs to become more accessible. Except for one of the interviewees, all of them from DOA in the 5 provinces said there is a negative view of women's shelters among Afghan people. The interviews mostly mentioned that the reason for this negative view among people is lack of awareness about how. The findings of this study also shows that the services to IDP women are not sufficient. All of the interviewees from Doha and the 5 provinces said that the services are not sufficient and cater only to IDP women's needs to a limited extent. Now, the challenges at the provincial level, based on the findings, we separated the challenges that Doha faced and the challenges that PPCs faced. Under Doha, the challenges included budget deficiency. Most of interviewees at Doha said they do not have enough budget to implement. They had not had budget during that time span to effectively operationalize these activities. Lack of facilities at Doha offices. Some of them say they do not have enough facilities to do certain activities under NAP 1325. For example, some of them say they do not have internet access. They do not have transportation facilities, for instance, for some of the activities. Lack of transport was also highlighted. Frequent reshuffling of employees at the decision-making level. Some of them pointed to this issue and said this reshuffling makes the smooth flow of events and activities impossible. Some of them pointed out security as an issue and negative cultural attitudes, particularly negative view of women's shelters. In PPCs also, we found out that budget deficiency was a problem. Lack of transparency in selection of female PPC members. This was particularly raised in Herat province. Insecurity and negative cultural attitudes, particularly raised in Nangarhar. Now, based on these findings, we have policy recommendations. Our policy recommendations are particularly to the Afghan government. All implementing agencies should utilize e-learning methods such as CDs to teach their staff at the central and provincial levels on the NAP 1325 action matrix, its objectives, its strategic objectives, its specific actions, and its indicators in details. Consultative meetings should be held to ensure participation of local government bodies in the assessment as well as development of laws, policies, and strategies to make sure that the laws, policies, and strategies reflect real needs of women. Budgeting of NAP 1325 activities should be done in participatory manner in which all implementing agencies at the central, provincial, and district levels should have input. NAP 1325 implementing agencies should make coordination groups at the central and provincial levels to improve coordination and cooperation during the implementation of NAP 1325. Capacity building for the implementation of NAP 1325 should be incorporated in the activities of the next phase of the action plan. Public consultation meetings should be held at district and provincial levels in the process of designing and developing activities for the next phase of NAP 1325. Awareness raising programs should be implemented at provincial and district levels to counter negative perception of women's shelters and women's participation in peace and reconciliation processes. Depict the effective role of women in the security sector as well as the negotiation and reconciliation processes through short documentary movies and videos to highlight and promote the idea that women's participation in these sectors is essential, effective, and constructive. Implementing agencies should seek ways to build local partnerships with CSOs, ulama, and community councils to garner support and cooperation in implementation of NAP 1325 at provincial and district levels. Sectors for women's participation should be diversified when designing the second phase of NAP 1325. So this was a very brief summary of the findings and recommendations of the study. Now, I would like to switch to my main role as moderator in this study, in today's program. I'm sorry. First of all, I'll give the floor to Ms. Geeta Kutipurambil, who is Women Peace Security Program Manager at UN Women Afghanistan. She will be speaking on accomplishments and ways forward and opportunities with the second phase of NAP 1325 perspectives from international community. Ms. Geeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning to friends who might be joining from outside. And thank you, Bismillah, for the floor and for this really good presentation that actually set the tone for the discussions coming ahead, and also Mariam and Drops for the invitation extended to UN Women on this important and timely session and a panel that you have. I am myself very privileged and honored to be part of this distinguished panel of guests to talk about, but more importantly, to also listen to an issue which is so crucial to everything we do, the centrality of women's participation and leadership in peace and security. It's something that's the heart of everything we do and that drives us in UN Women, but it's also something that has been the story of my own personal life. So it's also a personal passion. So that really is very privileged to be here. Before going into, like sort of the theme of it, I just want to also say that I have been here in this role and with UN Women in Afghanistan a little over 3 weeks. And I have to say that just in this, and it's just like time-wise, 3 weeks time, I have been so immensely touched by the force of women's voices, leadership across levels and contexts, whether it's through global platforms, country-specific, and how they are claiming the space to setting the priorities on peace and security, to define a sustainable peace priorities for Afghanistan. I was here, I have to say, 10 years ago, but just the sheer force and the progression of that shift in the last few years that I've seen in this last 3 weeks has really been very encouraging. In just these 3 weeks, there have also been numerous platforms where I've been privileged to listen to women leaders, whether it's from the government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, it's the civil society, think tanks like Drops, it's from the international community on UN Women or UN community, which has talked about the progress that has been on women, peace and security over this decade or the last few years. But also more importantly, what it has done, it has laid in the center of any political decision, women, peace and security, or women's participation in influencing peace at all levels as a political necessity for any decision making. Just exactly a week ago, in this, there was a panel or virtual panel of these diverse stakeholders, all committed to women's priorities and women's leadership in defining the peace and security agenda for the country. And they all consistently just emphasized this focus and said political imperative of women's leadership has to be not compromised in any decisions for Afghanistan. And this is coming from, and I'm so also, it's just one of those unique contexts also where I've seen and been part of the senior leadership across the government of Afghanistan also committing and demonstrating that commitment in all the actions that they are putting forth. Also just, I mean, as you all know, just it's also 20 years of the 1325 resolution, which for the first time put this agenda on the council and the decision-making for international peace and security. So on Thursday, 29th October, was that 20th anniversary celebrated at the Security Council, where the UN Secretary General clearly said it's set down 5 goals to transforming this agenda from words to action. He said we have to walk the talk. It's not the time for making more commitments, but it's the time for making that commitments into practice for all of us. And this is where the National Action Plan 1325, the framework for that, is the real crux, and it is the core of the backbone of anything and everything that we do towards defining and making that agenda real in our lives. And studies like this, the platforms like this, and work done by organizations like Drops here offers us that critical lessons learned, good practice, insightful information, which can then guide us in our collective vision, ambition towards that in the direction. I won't really go into the details of NAP, and like Bismillah said, it'll be also more from an international community and from UN Women's specific face of what we can do and how we can support this important agenda, because my other guests and the panelists are more best placed to talk about that. But from UN Women's side, we just want to continue to commit and reiterate and reinforce our continued support to the NAP2 as it being implemented. We have soon opening up the 5 provincial offices in Afghanistan, which offers us a very critical and significant position to actually make those connections. And as the study reveals, I mean, the local ownership and community strengthening, women-led processes, women's participation in those local governance and peace and security mechanisms, structures and mechanisms that connect those local initiatives to capital and provincial levels is something that is really a strong part of this, ensuring this wider ownership of this agenda. And that is where UN Women is really committed and supporting the government, the civil society, and the international stakeholders in moving forward. This is not really the time, 10 years ago, if I was talking something like this, we would have said, okay, how do we prove women's participation is central to sustaining peace? It's not, we moved far away. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to say now that women's participation and women's leadership in influencing peace and security is central for any sustaining peace outcome. So we are now really moving into the how. How can we do that? How can we jointly collaborate to deliver that? And that is again where the NAP and the NAP2 and the lessons learned from NAP1 and the process is already in place for NAP2 really give us that outcome, give us a guidance towards that outcome. Going back, and so just towards the globe, UN Women remain totally committed to that and supporting in every way we can. I just want to go back and close this by talking about going back to the council briefing that I talked about on 29th October, where the Afghan women leader from Zarqa, Yaftali, gave a briefing to the council, a very, very passionate and strong speech where she really demanded accountability from the international community, saying that women have claimed the space for peace and security in Afghanistan, and there is no way that their rights and their gains can be compromised in the pursuit of peace. And that is something that we need to be, that we are very conscious of protecting, safeguarding, supporting, and enhancing. And we therefore continue to support, collaborate, and work with the government to work on NAP, which is giving this inclusive framework to strengthen accountability, practice, and policy framework as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Geeta, for remarks. Now to give the floor to Mr. Ahmed Shahir Anil, Executive Director of APRO, to deliver his remarks. Mr. Anil, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to my other colleagues, and also to the participants watching and hearing us. And thank you, Mariam, and thank you, Bismillah, for providing us an opportunity to, share our analysis and share some of our findings with other distinguished guests in here. I think development of the first national action plan has been based mainly on the NAPWA, National Action Plan for Women of Afghanistan, that was initiated back in 2012, and then the most focus wasn't really initiated in 2012, but then we ended up having an evaluation of the NAPWA back in 2012, trying to see what were the findings and what were the sort of shortcomings. But then luckily back in 2015, the Afghan government committed itself in signing up for NAP 1325, renewing their sort of commitments towards developments and also more access to services for women. And then there was a great opportunity for us to share our sort of findings with the steering committee of that time that had the responsibility of developing the first NAP. Some of the recommendations were included, and some of the recommendations were incorporated well, but some of them still were missing and lacking. And there were a lot of opportunities that we felt the first National Action Plan could have actually played sort of a different role than the NAPWA, because the NAPWA to us seemed also to be a sort of a nice policy, but then there was a complete disconnect between but there was a complete sort of a disconnect between the policy itself and also the sort of a ministries, the partner ministries that were responsible for various indicators. So that was something that was missing. And then we were trying to convince the Minister of Foreign Affairs to implement that through the Citizens Charter, the second national solidarity program that was about to be launched, because we found out that opportunity, a well opportunity for the NAP to be streamlined through various services that the ministries were providing. The first NAP, our experience in dealing with various partners in the first NAP, particularly from our perspective that we were monitoring, monitoring initiatives and looking at the challenges, but at the same time reporting back those challenges to various partners. There was also a lack of capacity within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take this role as a sort of a leading role. Yes, there were mechanisms identified, there were sort of a steering committees and the advisory committees and the sort of a high-level committee that were looking at this commitment. But then what was lacking between them was a sort of a leading role, that it could actually define NAP 1325 indicators into their areas of work and specify that what needs to be done, how and be streamlined with the current programs. Lack of financial mechanism was another problem that we conducted a case study, and we wanted to define a suitable sort of a financing mechanism for that through the Ministry of Finance. And as you pointed out in your study, that yes, there has been deficiency in the budget as initially it was added. That also undermines some of the activities that it could have actually been done in a more effective way to boost up the sort of implementation of NAP 1325. What we also felt that when the reportings were happening to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, these were only the sort of routine reports. Lack of access to those data was also a little bit hard for us, so that we could have a better analysis of what was really missing. Religious institutions could have actually played a sort of a major role in implementation of various indicators, particularly when it comes to participation and prevention indicators. There were only 3 progress reports produced, I mean, to date, as far as I know, officially by the government, that is stipulating a lot of progresses, but it doesn't really share a lot of in-depth analysis that how other phases of NAPs could actually be sort of included in the current programs and current structures of the government. We wanted to do a comparative assessment of what are the other structures that NAP could actually be streamlined. And we wanted to do that study in a different context. Of course, having similarities with Afghanistan, like Indonesia and like Malaysia, to see what are their lessons learned in this regard. And as far as I feel that this NAP only feels to be a sort of a donor-driven agenda. The government has not made a sort of a significant and serious move in finding spaces for the policy to be effectively implemented. Of course, it does require a lot of monitoring. It does require a lot of capacity building, and NAP itself has to be interpreted well to various stakeholders. Some of the key informed intent views what NAP is and what are their responsibilities and how they have to sort of orient themselves towards those objectives. And to conclude my sort of speaking on that, I think there wasn't an extensive consultation on the course of development of the policy itself. The indicators that were developed, we of course provided our comments to our Minister of Foreign colleagues. Some of them, you know, integrated in the development of the second NAP, but some of them still needed to be included. Of course, it does require a lot of coordination and a lot of consultation with the various entities involved in this. Localization of NAP still remains to be a sort of a gap. I understand that there are a lot of civil society organizations who carried out, you know, numerous activities from capacity building to awareness raising and also to monitorings and to researches, but no one has really put all of these together to come up with a strategy to localize this NAP in a sort of a more coordinated way that it could actually result in more participation of women, especially in the current peace negotiations, or more participation of women, not only in the, you know, protection part of the NAP, but also in the relief and recovery. Yes, there has been an increase in the number of women in civil servants, but it's just a symbolic. Their participation is not enough. We want women to have a meaningful participation. I mean, I personally don't want women to just be there for, you know, women agendas, but they also want to be there for other agendas. So with that, I actually conclude my sort of a speaking, and I emphasize that the new NAP that is planned to be developed should include civil society and should include, you know, academics, should include journalists, and should include other stakeholders to have a new input and to also have a new strategy for an effective implementation of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anil Saab, for your remarks. Now we'll give the floor to Ms. Nafisa Koistani from Minister of Women Affairs, who will be speaking on the prospects for the second phase of NAP 1325 in the light of the lessons learned from the implementation of its first phase. And we would like to hear from Ms. Koistani on perspectives from Ministry of Women Affairs. Ms. Koistani, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting MOA to be as a panelist in this important session. I would like to say that in relation to prospect of second phase, in light of first phase, I would like to say that we're looking forward to achieve the goals targeted in the second one. And as we see and worked together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this time will be the indicators much achievable. Actually, in the past period from 2015 to 2018, MOA also had a strong position in the reporting and implementation of 1325 as a national action plan of MOA was based and designed on international commitments, which one of them was 1325. So although there were no budget allocated especially for 1325, we and the Ministry of Women Affairs managed to have some progress regarding this program. As it was reported, out of 37 indicators, there were 39 indicators, 37 were adopted, and that is one of the achievement for that. But there were some consideration, like there was no budget, but today for the second phase we have to have a separate budget for each ministry. So it's a good practice, and the gap will be removed. Another point, mechanism for financial wasn't in the first phase. Now this second phase has a mechanism, financial for mechanism, and also in the first phase there were two groups established. All the ministries were in that groups. That group was effective, and now it continues. This means that the lack of coordination at the beginning are going to be removed at the national level, and then in provinces, our DO is committed to have follow these commitments. Another point, indicators was brought in the first session and the first phase. Now the second phase is much clear and responsive to the main area, which is in 1325. Also, we MOA conducted many programs on awareness of 1325. Now people are with us to help MOA, and the good coordination will be done for the second phase. MOA was included in the second phase plan to be developed. One of the main points, which was in the past a big gap for women, like there is a policy of access in war situation and emergency status, which is important, and it is going to implement and evaluate soon. In 4 pillars, much achievement done in the previous time in the first session, and it will be continued in this phase. Also, for example, participation. We had in the past, before National Action Plan, we had, according to evaluation of NAPWA, we had 18% in civil service. Now, fortunately, we have 29.39% percentage of women in civil service. In the police, we had 233, but now we have 4,000 in police. And in defense, Ministry of Defense, now we have 2,700. That means that it really affected from the past to this phase. Also, we hope to get to the target of 5,000, which is our target for women in security section. Lots of law reviewed and amendment done. In this session, we had the anti-harassment law, like EVA law, and a lot of policies, like policy of access to inheritance. It's very important. And campaigns. Gender responsive budgeting started to 20 ministries, and these are the progress and changes And this phase, we hope we have a lot of success in 4 pillars in all area. So if you have anything else I add, otherwise I reissue and targeted all the area which is the change from the first and to the second reflected, and we will have a good plan for 2019 to 2022. Thank you very much for giving me time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Koistani, for your remarks and your contribution. We would like to go to question and answer, and I would like to share the questions with the panelists. There are a few questions due to the limited time that's remaining. We're not going to be able to take a lot of these questions, but one of the questions is to UN Women. What is a key lesson learned by UN Women from the implementation of the first phase of NAP 1325? There is one more question to, particularly to Mr. Anil, which says that the second phase of NAP 1325 coincides with possible start of the Afghan peace talks. So what do you think is the future of NAP 1325 based on the current peace talks? And there's one more question to us, the authors of this study, which asks as to why we selected these 6 provinces and what were the criteria. So because we don't have enough time, we're going to suffice to these questions. I will start off by answering the first question. We selected these 6 provinces based on 2 criteria. First of all, based on our own outreach at DROPS and our partner organizations, and second of all, to have some sort of representative study of NAP 1325 from the south, north, and west of the country. So that's a very short answer to the question, and more explanation to that is included in the study itself. Now I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Geeta to answer the question that was posed to UN Women, and then to Mr. Anil. And I would like to say that each speaker will have 2 to 3 minutes to answer the questions. Ms. Geeta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just if I may take a little bit of liberty with the question as well. I mean, I think because what I can probably say is also talk about what we have learned in implementing or supporting the implementation of NAP phase 2, which is a kind of a lesson learned which builds on from what we learned from phase 1, which really these 4 things which the my co-panelists have also referred to, which is from both Mofa and Anil, and also what DROPS had also identified in his research, which is really one of the things is really the big part of ensuring that ownership, you know, it's spread across the levels when we're talking about NAP and the framework. I mean, the NAP is for the purpose of ensuring women's participation across those pillars. So I think localization and strengthening that localization in the effective implementation, monitoring of that localization is really something that we have learned, and we are we found is a good practice, something that UN Women, as UN Women, we are committed to also supporting. The second thing I think is this having dedicated networks, again at the provincial level, so building or contributing or strengthening to having that kind of a NAP architecture, which is at that provincial level, to be able to facilitate that, not just implementation, but also monitoring and, you know, benchmarking, as someone said as well, and which is then facilitated as my panelist from co-panelist from MOFA said about, you know, and ensuring that having money to finance the budget. I think those are really good practices that we've learned is working. And the last one I want to just is having this multiple groups, so it's a diverse group of CSOs, focal points of the provincial networks, which are which I mentioned ago, and then this multiple stakeholders who are so that the ownership is not just defined by one group, but this journalists, civil society, think tanks, and then the government and the provincial network focal points are together in kind of discussing or deciding the priorities and implementing, and is something that's important to then ensure women's voices are adequately put into the center of these decisions that happen in a collaborative way. That's from my side. Thank you.
Ali Zada said, may I start?
Yeah, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I think it's a very interesting question. I also had that noted down in my notes, that there are a couple of incoming threats to a lot of gains that we have, sort of achieved through a couple of years of various attempts by civil society, by UN Women, by, the government itself. Yes, the peace negotiation is definitely going to affect the implementation, as well as we don't know how the structure of the new government would actually look like if peace is going to be gained. Otherwise, post-peace situation is completely unclear. And I think when I was actually following up the peace discussions, and I was questioning myself that if both the negotiation teams have nothing to discuss with each other, I think there is a time for us to feed them with information, feed them with agendas to discuss and talk. I think the peace negotiation, the current peace negotiation, is not a sort of a one-time deal. There is going to be a post-peace situation that it does require a lot of structures, including civil society, to start alerting about a lot of these gains we have achieved through a couple of years. And I think women groups and women civil society organizations should put more emphasis in the inclusion of the agenda in the peace negotiations. And I think it's also important to take into account COVID-19, because we have been receiving a lot of anecdotal information that gender-based violence and violence itself is increased by men being at home. So that requires more attention for protection structures and for protection mechanisms to have avenues to take into account that. Corruption and gender-based discrimination has been another sort of upraising issue that is of course affecting a lot of these attempts, and that of course requires the intervention of the partners, particularly the ministries and the departments that are directly responsible for the implementation of NAP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anil Saib, for your remarks. We would like to have to take one more question. There is a question to Ms. Koistani from our audience, which says, as insecurity continues to rise across the country, especially threats targeting women, how will this impact the implementation of the second phase of NAP 1325? Ms. Koistani?
For this question, I would like to say that Ministry of Women Affairs work closely with Ministry of Peace and worked throughout the country and gathered all the views and recommendation of women throughout the country, how we managed to work and to implement 1325. So in one question, we targeted two topics, one 1325 and also the situation in the country. So we are close to Ministry of Peace, and for this there are a lot of mechanisms, and we follow another mechanism like the whole country, like in the provinces, the MDOWA is ready to work in the area. They are familiar and they are people accept them and people coordinate with them. So this will be easy for Ministry of Women Affairs to work at the provincial level. Only difficulties are in the local, I mean, district level, that we are trying to have some focal points there to work closely with people in that area also. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Koistani. Before we close the event, I would like to ask if the panelists have any final remarks or any questions. We would be more than happy to take questions or to listen to your remarks. So apparently,
if there are any questions, you can just jump right in. Any questions for Drops on Its study, or any questions for the other speakers, please just jump in.
I don't have any question. I only have an addition to what you actually concluded. I wanted to emphasize on the role of all the sort of actors in this discussion, particularly the partners. That yes, we are monitoring the situation. We have been reporting on the shortcomings of the implementation, and I think there is a need for us to establish a consortium that we can provide assistance to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and particularly technical assistance through our studies and through our sort of initiatives, and at the same time help them to develop that sort of analytical capacity so that they can actually analyze the information that they get from their partners, and particularly from the ministry, so that it doesn't remain only a report, but it also sort of highlights the sort of a ways forward for a joint and a coordinated effort.
Thank you so much, Anil Saib, for that addition. From the panelists, if there is any other remarks, would be more than happy to listen to. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. I would like to extend a warm thank you to all of the panelists who participated in this event and shared their valuable insights and analysis on NAP 1325 with a focus on the implementation of its first phase and the drawing prospects for its second phase. Particularly, thank you, Ms. Geeta, for reiterating the commitment of UN Women for NAP 1325 for its second phase. And thank you so much for highlighting the need for localization of NAP 1325 that you said has been a key lesson UN Women has learned from implementation of NAP 1325. Also, thank you, Mr. Anil, for bringing interesting insights into this discussion. Particularly, thank you so much for sharing lessons learned on missing points and missing criteria, as well as missing indicators that you shared with us. Also, thank you so much for again highlighting the need for localization of NAP 1325. And lastly, thank you, Ms. Koistani, for summarizing achievements that UN Women and other implementing agencies has made during the implementation of NAP 1325. Thank you so much for sharing with us the lessons learned and for drawing for us the prospects for the second phase of NAP 1325. Once again, thank you so much, everyone from the audience as well.